Hello and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, it's another midweek mini mail call video. I've started to accumulate more mail call packages, so I'm going to try to get these out more frequently. I know I've skipped a couple weeks recently and I try to do it on Wednesday if possible, but life gets in the way and things happening in the world sometimes just don't allow me the time I need to do it. So if you sent in packages recently, don't worry, I will get to them, but I'll go in order of when I've received them. So I'm still working on stuff that I've received back in May. So no more delay, let's get right to the video. Okay, so the next package, it's from Dan in St. Louis, Missouri. Hi to all my Missouri viewers. Incidentally, you may notice I don't have a Band-Aid on my thumb. It's been healing really well. I guess thumbs heal pretty quick because there's a lot of blood vessels there or whatever. I don't know. Anyways, it healed fast. Okay, we have a note, which I'll set off to the side. And let's dig into what this is. Some good packing material. I always appreciate that because I will keep this to reuse. All right, so it seems like we have some components. I got something like a card. Ooh, we got a bunch of stuff, and it's all very nicely wrapped. All right, let's see what we have here. First thing is a CRT yoke. So this is basically the magnetic deflection coil yoke that would go on a CRT. And it does look like there's just some random little components. There's a couple surface mount caps. One of the little adjustment magnets has snapped off this yoke, and there's other parts. I don't know if these really came off of this. Yeah, a couple of these adjustment magnets did, but anyways, okay, well, I'll set this aside. We'll look at that in a second. Aha, look at that. Okay, so this is the fan assembly from a Mac Classic. I recognize it right away. And in this box here, looks like we have a floppy drive, an Apple floppy drive. Got the cable here. And the drive itself, along with a mounting bracket for it. Now, it's interesting. I'm not quite sure what Mac this is from because all of the ones I worked on, the disk drive, when you put it in the mounting bracket, actually was covered up on the top. So this one sort of leaves the top of the drive exposed. Cool. Okay, we'll set that over there. What's in here? Oh, all right. I can see some more Macintosh parts. Nice. So we have an analog board, and I can tell right away that this one is from the Mac Classic. There are two revisions of analog boards, and I can't tell immediately which one this is, but this is great. Some spare parts for those Macs. And in here, I wonder if this is a motherboard. I wonder if Dan has sent me another Mac Classic motherboard. Yeah, he sent me a Mac motherboard, and this one is actually from a Classic II. And what's sweet about that is I can put this in one of the Mac Classics. Now, the Mac Repairathon Series is still going on my channel. I just put out part 4 as of filming of this video, but I've actually finished the Repairathon, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there are 6 total parts. Now, what's really cool is Dan has sent me a Mac Classic II motherboard, and this motherboard is actually compatible with the Classic case. The only thing is that the Classic II has an audio input jack here, and the original Classic didn't have anything there, so there is no hole in the case. So I could probably either just take this connector off or drill out the hole on the back of the case and upgrade one of those Classics to be a Classic II. It's going to be a stealth upgrade because it will say Classic on the front, but you'll end up with a much faster machine. Even though this is not as good as an SE30, it's still better than a Classic. And then Dan has also sent me a capacitor and a couple transistors here. So let's take a look at his note and see what he says about what these parts are. Adrian, I saw part 1 of the Mac Repairathon, and I thought you might be able to use an analog and logic board from a Classic II that I got with a lot of Mac parts I bought on eBay. I only needed the CRT for the Mac Plus that I repaired and recapped. The core on the transformer on the analog board, which is this right here, is broken, and there are a couple of caps on the logic board that are missing. The caps are in the process of leaking anyways, and the PRAM battery hadn't leaked, so the board may be repairable. Ah, yes. Okay, so I see some of these caps here have come off, and I definitely see lots of evidence of leaky corrosion caps on this board. And on the analog board, yeah, there are pieces of the transformer here that are falling off. So it obviously suffered some type of trauma at some point. That would never normally happen. I found out that some of the ferrite from the transformer, which is this broken part here, found its way in the floppy drive. So the floppy drive might be able to be used if it can be cleaned out or fixed. All right, this happened during shipping. Probably when this thing got shipped to him, it suffered some serious trauma, which sent parts all over the place. Also included are new BU406 transistors and the 3.9 UF cap on the left cover repairing the Mac Plus. And it's interesting, I think this is a pretty common part to fail in the Mac Plus. It's right at the top of the power supply board. It gets a lot of heat, and when this fails, then the analog board stops working. I actually have a spare Mac Plus analog board, which I didn't show in the Repairathon series, but it had been already sort of worked on previously by someone else, and they had replaced this cap, and there was some other damage on that board that caused a cascade of failure. I ended up getting that board working. I didn't make a video about it. I did put a post on the VCF Forums, though, about the repair process, so I'll put a link in the description to that if you're interested to see what it took for me to fix that Mac Plus analog board. Dan goes on to say, something I found out while repairing the Mac Plus is that if there isn't a load on the power supply, it won't be able to regulate and will overvolt. And that is absolutely true. So it either makes a chirping noise continually as it tries to protect itself, or it puts out like 18 volts on the 12-volt rail, which is beyond what the capacitors and things on that board need. So it's not good to run the Mac Plus without a load on it. He goes on to say the Mac Plus board he was repairing had a burned out horizontal output transistor, BU406, that was burned open from chronic overheating, along with the bipolar yoke coupling capacitor 3.9. On that spare Mac Plus analog board that I repaired, it turned out to be a different transistor that had died and caused all sorts of other issues. But on the Mac Repairathon series, those two Mac Plus machines that I got with that lot, I won't give any spoilers to what was wrong with those and what it took to fix those machines. Anyhow, that's the end of the note, so let's take a closer look at this stuff on the bench. Before I do anything with this Mac Classic II motherboard, I want to remove these caps and give a good wash, but let's just take a look at the corrosion that is caused from these leaky caps. So the board is pretty dirty, but you can see on this IC here, look at that crusty corrosion. That does not look great. These are the missing caps that he was talking about. I guess they just got knocked off somehow. Over here, it's looking pretty gross as well. We'll get a better view of things once I've washed this off. Hey, at least the SIM sockets have metal clips. That's nice. Okay, for removing all these caps, I am just going to use the twist method. So I grab it, and then I just start turning. Hold the motherboard in place, and keep twisting until the capacitor just releases, just like that. It came right off. Okay, all the caps are removed, and I did desolder the battery holder as well, since the corrosion kind of went under it, and I wouldn't reinstall that junky battery holder anyways. So there are all the caps. A few of them fell on the floor, so there were actually more of them. But this board is ready for washing. I think everyone knows the drill by now. I have a little tub with some soapy warm water in it. Here's the motherboard, and it goes right in. Make sure to agitate it a little bit just to make sure that water is in all the nooks and crannies, under components and stuff like that. And I like to give it a little pre-scrub. So here's a toothbrush. And I'm just going to kind of, especially around any of the areas where the capacitors leaked, I just like to scrub that spot just to try to free up as much of that capacitor gunk as possible, all right? It was one of these small ICs here that had a bunch of that blue corrosion on it. I'll make sure to scrub that just to try to dislodge as much of that as possible so that this soapy water can have a positive effect on it. Okay, that's enough pre-scrubbing. I think I'll just leave that in there to soak for a while. Well, it's hard to believe that this is the same motherboard that Dan sent me, but after washing it, I removed all the cap remnances and then I recapped it. I haven't done a final clean to get all the flux off, but recapping it was actually pretty easy. I think part of it is I'm just getting a lot better at recapping boards than I used to be. This was the RAM that was in there, and it cleaned up really nicely as well, so I can just reinstall this, but I'll leave it out for now while I test this board. There was definitely some blue fluffy corrosion around a few of these ICs here, but I sprayed it with IPA and scraped it off, and it looks pretty good now. There's definitely reminiscences of capacitor corrosion all over this board around these ICs, but hopefully this board actually works now that it's been recapped. All right, for testing, I'm going to slide this motherboard into this chassis here, and we'll see if it even works at all. And it's all nestled into this chassis. It's actually a Mac Classic chassis, but this Classic II board will work fine in it. And here we go. Oh, no bong. So this motherboard must not be working. Oh, we're not even getting any image at all. That, unfortunately, is a bad sign because the CRT is not even running. Oh, wait a second. I just fiddled with the wires a little bit, pushed on them, and we hear a bong. And the computer is booting. So I think I should have applied a little bit of Deoxit maybe to the power connector, or actually check that the solder joints on the power connector were good or not. So I'm going to pull the board out, I'm going to install this memory, and I'll put some Deoxit on it as well. All right, my favorite stuff, a little Deoxit in the power connector. I'm going to put some on the memory as well. Might as well put some in the floppy and the SCSI connector while I'm at it. This is the RAM that was in this board when I got sent it from Dan. So we'll pop this back in here. Not sure if these are 256 sims or 1 meg each. Okay, we're ready to try again. I've plugged in my SCSI zip drive. It's pretty crappy. It's got a piece of plastic on the top here because the window was missing when I bought this. I got it locally off Craigslist or OfferUp or something. So I have a System 7 boot disk, which is this one, which I think is the minimum required for the Classic II. All right, here we go. Oh, that sound is nice. All right, it's booting off the internal hard drive again, which is going to not work. So how do I force it to boot off the zip drive? It's reading it now, but it's booting off the internal. I guess the easiest solution is to unplug the power on the internal hard drive. There we go, unplugged. Now it has no choice but to boot off the zip drive. There we go, booting. It's weird, I'm not sure what's going on. It keeps trying to format a disk, as far as I can tell. Disk initialization failed because the disk is locked. There's no floppy disk in this drive. And as far as I can tell, it's in the eject state right now too. So there might be a fault on the motherboard. So I'm just going to stick a disk in this disk drive, which I haven't cleaned or serviced yet. But yeah, look, it was happy with that. It's rebuilding the desktop file on the zip disk. Okay, we have 4 megs of RAM. So those were 1 megabyte sims, and the motherboard has 2 megabytes built in. Macintosh Classic II. So yeah, to go over 4 megs, you need to have larger sims. So cool, this thing does seem to be working. Let's just quickly check the audio. Cool, sound is working great. Now, I haven't replaced the battery, so obviously there's not going to be any saving of real-time clock information, but the computer does seem to be working fine. I'm actually not sure if this floppy drive even works inside this computer. Let me eject it with this paper clip here. It's honestly quite possible that this particular floppy drive is bad. I have not serviced it, so I'm not going to really trust that it works before I blame this computer for having a problem. So I've rebooted the computer, disconnecting the internal disk drive, which might be faulty, and I've connected the external disk drive. The external disk drive and the internal disk drive basically are parallel, if you recall, except for the one drive select signal. So if it works with the external disk drive, I'm going to say the internal one works. And look at that. Yep, came right up. So this drive on this computer must be faulty. Yep, I hadn't serviced it, so whatever. Yep, seems to be working fine. All right, cool. This motherboard works. It's running Crystal Quest here, which is kind of my bellwether test to see if one is working or not. But as far as I can tell, everything is working well. Thumbs up. Here's a close look at everything. So the first thing is the fan shroud from a Mac Classic. And this thing actually has this snapped off piece. Dan had included this in a Ziploc bag. Probably this machine suffered some serious trauma during shipping. Now, I had one of these that was attached to that rusty chassis I took out of that one Mac Classic, which I threw away. Maybe I shouldn't have now that I have extra parts. But anyhow, it's gone, so there's nothing I can do about it now. So I think I'm just going to save this fan, and unfortunately the rest of this is not to be kept. Next up was this thing, which I said was the floppy drive holder, which was weird because it didn't have the cover on it. Well, I realize now that this is actually the hard drive holder, not the floppy drive holder. Now, with the 4 original Mac Classics I had, one of them was missing this tray. I think it was the Mac Classic II. But because I ended up scrapping one of those machines, I ended up with enough of these hard drive caddies. So I will just throw this in my storage bin for now in case I ever need one of these in the future. Then there was the motherboard for the Mac Classic II, which, as you have already seen, I recapped and it works perfectly. So thank you very much for a nice working Mac Classic II motherboard. And then we have one of the disk drives, a 1.44 megabyte version. Dan mentioned that he thought some of the ferrite from the broken transformer on this analog board got into the disk drive and maybe ruined it. Well, I doubt this drive is ruined. Oh, I see what he's talking about. This is not normal. It shouldn't be making these types of noises. I am curious if I take these screws out, maybe this plate comes off and I can access the electromagnets and maybe see what's going on underneath there. Maybe I can clear out that debris that's stuck on the permanent magnets. This is purely a cover. There's a little plastic piece here, and there are the electromagnets. Yep, that is not good. In fact, with that plate missing, this thing really makes horrible noises. So I'm really not sure how to take this apart any further. If you have any tips on how to get this motor assembly apart in a way that doesn't require a bunch of special tools, let me know in the comment section, because maybe this drive is fixable. Before I completely give up on this drive, I have removed the top disk assembly, and just to kind of see what exactly is holding this on. I have released this little clip here, and if I pull that off, I may never be able to get that back on again. I thought somehow that would release this. Oh, well, I just broke that, so there's definitely no fixing of this disk drive. There's clearly a better way to get that off besides breaking it. So, all right, this disk drive is definitely a parts drive at this point. Now, I actually have another parts drive that has this center ring thing that I just broke intact. The electronics on that drive are all corroded because it had an exploded battery that exploded right by it. Okay, well, would you look at that? I think I've disassembled the motor. Let's pull this bottom plate off. It's really hard because of the magnets. And there is the permanent magnet part of the disk drive. It's actually sandwiched between the PCB and the drive chassis. And this was the part that was on the bottom. Let's just pull these stickers off here. So you see the ring on there? That's the scratching from where the ferrite material was stuck in there, getting spun around. There are the electromagnetic voice coils for the motor driver to allow the variable speed. And I'm certainly not seeing remnants right now of the ferrite core, but it's quite possible that it had fallen out as soon as I pulled this apart. So I popped that back in like that. And then if I take this ring, which apparently is just held on entirely with magnetic attraction. So boy, do I feel dumb. Let me reinstall this plate here. Well, the drive is back together, and look, this spins nice and smooth, no more scratchy noises. So unfortunately, having taken off that plastic retaining ring, there isn't a way for me to fix this particular drive. But that's not to say I can't combine this drive with the other one that has the exploded battery damage all over it, because that really took a toll on the bottom part of the drive where the PCB is. I can see why this plastic ring broke. It is extremely brittle. This plastic is so brittle. Look, I could just snap it like it's nothing. It was probably originally press fit onto that spindle, and it's just snapped. But in case you are ever wondering, this plate on the bottom of the disk drive, you can simply just lift it off. Nothing holds it on except for magnetism of the permanent magnet, which is actually on the other side of the PCB. So if you do need to clean this out, like I needed to do, you just lift it off. So let my experience of damaging this drive be a lesson to you if you need to fix one of these disk drives so it spins again. I went into my parts bin and I found the old destroyed floppy drive. Check this out. Does this corrosion on the bottom of the drive look familiar? That's a lithium battery that kind of exploded. So it went all over the bottom metal parts of the drive and all over the PCB which isn't in too bad of a shape, but there is quite a lot of that kind of crusty lithium stuff on the PCB. Here's the head assembly and motor that Dan sent me, the one that I broke. And luckily, when the battery exploded, it really only attacked these steel parts and not the aluminium parts or the plastic, of course, of the head assembly. So I took the head assembly, chassis, and motor from the dead drive here, and I combined that with the drive electronics and this bottom cover and this cover as well, along with these side bracket things plus this top cover from Dan's drive. And I think I have a good working disk drive now. I've serviced and lubricated it, as you've seen in some of my other videos, and now it sounds very nice and snappy. Now, of course, the eject mechanism is gonna need a new gear, and I don't have one, but I'll open this up and take a look inside. It might work just well enough to eject a little bit. And luckily, look, the motor spins nice and free with no scratchiness whatsoever. And this drive should hopefully work, but there's actually a problem with it that I need to fix before I can even try to use it on the computer. When I was reassembling the drive to make a good one, a piece of the PCB came off, and I found it. It's a little transistor here. I know it's just tiny. A little tiny SMD transistor. So from the destroyed drive, I happen to have a PCB I could compare with, and I noticed that there are 2 transistors that are completely gone from this board. They must have been knocked off with some physical trauma from whatever this computer experienced. Well, luckily I have this parts board, and it has 2 good transistors right there, labeled Q9 and Q4. Luckily, checking on the drive here, the traces and everything are good. The components must have just got knocked off with physical trauma and cracked, like this one right here. So time to start with the surgery. And there we go. It's not the cleanest soldering in the world, but those are the 2 transistors this board needed. Wow, I opened up the eject motor, and the little gear here is different than the normal ones, which are sort of a yellow plastic that completely degrades. This one, on the other hand, is white plastic, similar to these, which never seem to degrade. It's like a better quality plastic. So I'm just going to take this out and give this a little clean, put a little fresh lubricant in here. Maybe this eject motor will actually work. I've plugged the piece together disk drive into this Mac Classic. Let's turn it on. Head moved, so that's a good sign it did something. And I'm gonna stick a high density floppy disk in the drive. What's gonna happen? Oh yes, okay, that's good. The disk will be blank, so let me hit initialize. Erase. Untitled. It's going. It is actually going. What I need to do is clean the little stepper head assembly here. It's really gunked up and gross. It's good to do while it's spinning. Look at that. Look at that mess. It ejected the disk like it wasn't happy. So I have a high density disk, Mac OS 7.1 fonts, and I'm going to stick this in this drive, and hopefully it reads it. And then I will copy everything off of it onto the hard drive just to make sure it can read the entire disk. So it did read it. Uh-oh, it says there's a disk error. So maybe this drive is not quite working so well. Let's hit continue. This disk may also be bad. I'm not totally sure. So it read the rest of the floppy disk. It was just that one file that was bad. So let's try another disk. Here's a Photoshop LE high density disk. Let's copy these files onto the hard drive. Success, that worked. Obviously the other disk was just bad. It was one I made, and those discs, like I said in my last video, high-density discs, they seem to go bad a lot. Okay, time to format this first disk that wasn't formatting correctly. Oh, it says initialization failed, so that disk did not format correctly. Oh, I formatted this black diskette here in the PC, and it shows bad on this machine too. So either it got ruined by that disk drive, it looks fine inside, or this disk, it's just bad. And I'm formatting another disk. 800K, see if this one works. Initialization failed. So I've been fiddling with this drive for hours and I can't figure out what's wrong with it. I can read and write 1.4 and 800K disks without issue, but formatting 800K disks it always fails. It writes to the disk, and then as it's doing the verification, it ejects it with a failed message. 1.4 meg disks, on the other hand, do work. Now, I did find that if I flip the drive upside down, it does format 800K disks properly. So that's a real mystery to me. I tried retensioning the read-write head assembly. You can actually remove it from the drive, and there's a spring which you can adjust with 3 different settings, low, medium, and high. This drive was set to the medium position. I tried both low and high. It didn't really make a difference. But on the lowest settings, the lowest spring tension, I thought that might be a help, because when you turn upside down, the gravity kind of pulls on the head here a little bit. I thought maybe there's too much pressure, but it didn't quite work. Now I removed this metal plate from the top of the read head, and it did format a disk one time in this position, but otherwise it's not working. Now I know these disks are good because it will eject from this. I can stick it in another disk drive like the one that's sitting up here, and it formats these disks every time. I've tried multiple disks, same thing every single time. Also, under the eject motor, there's a potentiometer, which I don't know what that actually does, but I thought maybe it's the write current. So I tried tweaking that. It was sort of set to a middle position. I tried all over the dial from high to low, and it also seems to make no difference. I've also tried different floppy drive cables in case that was a problem. And the final tidbit is it does format this disk as single-sided 400K every time. It only has a problem with 800K. There's one last thing. This was the original drive that the drive electronics came from. This head assembly looks slightly different than this one. They're very similar, but they're definitely not the same. There's different markings, the plastic molding is different. So it's quite possible that these are just different heads, and this drive electronics is calibrated for these and not those. But unfortunately, one of the issues with these, I can't just take these heads off and put them on this mechanism, is one of the tabs from this ribbon cables is missing. When I pulled it off, it was already torn and it just fell off of my hands. So I think part of the damage this drive suffered actually broke the little ribbon cable. So this drive is still going to be a parts drive because I don't know how to fix it. But if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear it in this comment section below. Otherwise, yep, it's a parts drive. Next up is the culprit of the damaged disk drive. Well, before I got to it, it made it worse. But anyways, it's the analog board from the Mac Classic II that Dan sent over. And here's a chunk of the ferrite material that was on this transformer here. So there's a couple pieces here. I mean, what kind of trauma happened to this machine that took a big piece of this metal out of here? And oh yeah, look, it's totally broken. So this thing is definitely toast. There are little pieces of metal on this tape here. There are 3 big chunks. Copper tape here is shredded, and there's just shrapnel all over the place. Look, here's another piece of something. I also noticed besides the broken transformer, this machine is missing the power connector and the power switch. Where exactly did those go? Did those snap off as well? And yes, I'm looking at the solder connections for the IEC and the power switch. These were just ripped right out of here. There's no obvious attempts for desoldering. There must have been some serious trauma that just snapped those right out of this board. And in fact, I noticed right here along this plastic piece that's there, the PCB has a big crack in it. Yep, there's a big crack that kind of runs this direction. So this PCB is relegated to the parts bin, but that's fine actually. I keep stuff like this because you never know when you're going to need to remove a component. Like say I need one of these resistors or one of these switching transistors or one of these pots. Here's a perfect donor board. Or of course the flyback transformer. If this thing ever dies on one of the other classics, just pop it off here and I can fix that board. But Dan, if you're watching, I'll be very curious if you can comment to say, what kind of condition was this machine in when you got it? Because for this to be damaged, this must have really taken a beating. And finally, like I mentioned in the letter, he sent along a capacitor and 2 transistors, and he used these to fix his Mac Plus. So he said, in case I need to fix my Mac Pluses with these, I have these in stock. I'll be putting out the repair video for those 2 Mac Pluses soon enough. Besides the 2 Mac Pluses that I just got with all those Mac Classics, I actually have a Mac Plus that was my father's, and I have a Mac 512 and a Mac 128. I think I made videos about at least the 128 and the 512 before, and they would all use these parts. So if I ever need to fix those analog boards, it's actually good to have something like this on hand. So thank you, Dan, for donating these parts to Digital Basement. I'm especially happy about this Mac Classic II motherboard, which will definitely be going into one of those 2 Mac Classics to give it a little stealth upgrade. Well, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. But if you didn't know what to do, you can hit that thumbs down button. Hit the subscribe button if you want to subscribe to my channel. It really does help. And of course, that little bell icon will notify you when I upload new videos. Put your comments and your suggestions in the comment section below. I really appreciate it when you do so. And that's going to be it. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.